I've been given a 5-minute slot now just to share my perceptions, as I did last year in Brussels, on what I've heard over the last 2.5 days and try and park it in some way that might help build on some of the things that have been said, including just now by Nate. Having seen people operate this clumsily, let me get instructions on this. So do you remember I started on Wednesday morning just saying that last year in Brussels and since that time I detected a sort of taxonomy, it's far from complete or accurate, that had people in those sorts of categories. And so I thought it might be just interesting. Last night, instead of going out and eating another 2 or 3 tons of Wiener Schnitzel, I put together a summary of what I heard in this meeting, and it's a personal summary on each of those taxonomies. The first one, on the peak oil one, I think generally I heard, as an outsider, that basically it's true. Yeah, we've got data that shows that peak discovery and that the production from existing wells and so forth is going down. Estimated reserves in new fields are not going to match, and production will decline this decade, but the actual rate of decline will depend on oil price, market and demand and technology. We're not quite sure of that. We've heard different views here, Jim's view and Bob's view yesterday, but there's a question mark in my mind on that. And that comes to the second view that I also heard last year, the sunny uplands of a plateau with some spikes and so forth. I think that's what I've heard here, is that that's partly true, and that it's only partly true in the sense that, yes, for the trends that we've mentioned, we are going to see a decline, but that those economic effects of higher oil prices will actually cushion that. But that said, that for geological, technical, economic reasons, that the slope away, that the length of that plateau is not going to be multi-decadal. The peak myth, this was the counter myth, if you like, where people are saying there's not a problem. Yes, to an extent I think it's true, but the reality is that every person I sit beside in an aeroplane or a train does point to all of those non-conventional oil, gas, methane, and so forth. They're reasonably literate in that, and they believe that it's going to come through in time. There is that Pollyanna view that economics and technology, we humans with this creative instinct in our breast, are going to continue to bring things on in time as we have in the past. Well, read history and we haven't. But as we see it here, it's going to have a cushioning effect on demand and supply problems, but it's not going to prevent the underlying problems that we've heard throughout the 2.5 days. But we did hear very clearly, and I hear it everywhere I go, and I'm sure you do too, that this good news stories tend to trump the bad news facts. People don't want to be confronted by this. It is an inconvenient truth, not limited to oil. It extends to all natural resources. The other point that was made in this context was, I think there was a broad agreement in the room that there was a very high risk of political, social chaos when the peak oil message hits. Markets these days in particular respond quickly and punish quickly. On the peak demand issue, we didn't discuss that much, but for the extent that we did, I heard that as being false. People think that there's no way on earth that we, with our, as Bob Hirsch put it, with our 100 trillion global infrastructure on oil, and here let's distinguish importantly between the conversation about oil and energy, we're simply not going to decouple that quickly, and I personally can't see the demand peak occurring, although we are seeing, of course, reductions in demand in some countries driven largely by economic conditions. But replacing core uses for cars, trucks and aeroplanes in particular, there is no early substitute, and that's going to bite. Peak economics, that's the viewpoint that it's really price that determines things. It's linked to the other points, they're not mutually inconsistent. True, I think we're going to see that there is going to be expanded production of non-conventional if the price is there and if economies can sustain that. And that's exactly the issue of uncertainty in the future, that we're going to see considerable question marks around the precise long-term impacts depending on economic growth. And here, let's say that there's an economic downturn that's prolonged and significant. What is going to happen where governments and investors have a choice between going to the oil and gas that they know drives an economy or the renewable energy that they know can drive part of an economy? There is a real risk here of an investment flood to oil and gas in particular, and rather than to renewables. Remains to be seen how that will play out, but that is a risk, so that the economic collapse could actually drive residual investment in oil and gas. The peak emissions point came through very clearly on Dramer's climate change. While there's still some scientific discussion around that, of course, we've had the IPCC coming out very clearly on that issue, and that there is concern driving policies around the world. But as we've seen, those policies, where the rubber meets the road, are continuing to encounter, in many countries, significant problems on the technological, social, and economic case. And in terms of peak insecurity, and this was the last of the typologies, this was the global geostrategic issue. I think we're seeing there that increasingly governments, particularly defense departments, are recognizing that this is an issue. They are the ones, along with intelligence agencies, that were the earliest movers in commissioning the research that came out with the affirmation of what you folk have actually pointed to earlier. And we are seeing them put more emphasis, particularly the United States and China, on defense policies and positions that will guarantee their secured access. They're also adopting policies that say energy of all sources. They're not making choices here particularly. And we're seeing the oil majors, as came through yesterday, trying to avoid high-risk political sources, even though the oil might be better, in exchange for lower-risk locations that are more technologically and environmentally challenging. Now, of course, we can all think of additional peaks in there and describe those, but it seems to me that they're the sort of things that we covered in this the last 2.5 days, and that was my take-home away, and I thank you very much for all the inputs on that. Let me finish with the gaps. Do you remember I also mentioned what I regarded as a number of gaps concerning the peak oil issue? I think we heard pretty clearly continuing concerns about information gaps, not only limited to oil field data and lack of third-party audited information in relation to oil field production and investment, but also around renewable energies as well. There's still some information lacking. Awareness, that came through strongly. We're still not particularly aware. Key decision makers, politicians, and investors, importantly, aren't as alert to or literate in the issues of peak oil as we think they should be. Lack of awareness about energy consumption in particular and where energy comes from is manifest everywhere that I go. Capacity, a really important issue that came out on the first day. I found it very challenging that the proposition that in fact the number of people in this world who could actually read the data and understand it is very limited. And it's primarily in the industry itself and outside in very narrow boundaries, possibly in the financial community, and as Jeremy Leggett said this morning, certainly not in the government of the United Kingdom, and I'm sure in many others as well. Discussion issue, we didn't really touch that, but I think we've all said that ASPO conversations around the world aren't really particularly rich outside the ASPO community. There's a small community there. The oil majors are not interested in this conversation. Equally, on the communication front, the panel that opened this morning underscored the point that the media doesn't really take a great interest in this issue. It will be a splash, but then will be often countered by press that is more sensational, going the other direction, the peak myth approach. So there's still a job for us all to do in communication, that was highlighted also in Nate's comments. And then on the public side, public policy side, we still do not see international energy institutions having this conversation at all. We don't have them working together politically, collectively on their own existing agendas, and their mandates are certainly not extending to embracing peak oil as a serious subject for conversation. So we have, at the government leadership side, some very real constraints in how that's going. But we've had also some terrific ideas about how that might be done at a social level, at a national level. We've had some very good examples of what's happening here in Austria, of project funding in relation to this, and giving examples of how, particularly in the context of cities, we might actually understand this, because it will be in cities very largely where the impacts will be first felt and where most people live, and where the conversations, I think, will flare up and take shape very quickly. So they were my closing thoughts on that.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to give some of the closing remarks. I did most of the work together with Patrick Brokorens from ASPO Belgium to organize the last conference in Brussels, and I helped Georg and Michael out this year mainly with structuring the program and inviting speakers, because they are fairly new to the ASPO network, and I've been there for quite a long time, and I'm still surprised that I was the youngest when I learned about the network, and I'm probably still one of the youngest in the room, being 27. Because I learned about ASPO and peak oil when I was 19. And I almost made a decision, and I'm not sure if I regret it, but I'm thinking if I'm regretting it, to go to the ASPO Berlin conference in 2004. But I thought it was too expensive, because it was 100 euros, and for me that was, at that age, I was thinking, that's Andon to Berlin, first trip to Germany. I was a bit hesitant, so just about my background. And I've been thinking about the conference and ASPO a bit today for the closing remarks. And I must say, I think it's great what Michael and Georg have done in terms of structuring. They pressed me on that last year there was not enough time for breaks and for coffee and to talk to people, and I think they did a great job on that, and I agree that this is one of the most fundamental things at a conference, that you can learn people, to meet them, to get updated on what they're doing, and get a feel for new projects, but also new insights from different perspectives, and I congratulate you on that. The other thing that we come at the conference is to learn things, at least I do, to learn things about energy, to learn things in the broader perspective of energy, and on the one hand also as a sort of news. What's new in the world of energy? For many people, I think that's one of the things, because we are involved in our own little part of it, usually, and we don't get the full broad spectrum, and that's nice about ASPO conference, to get updated on topics regardless of the avenue in this sort of broad spectrum. And I think that's very helpful. There are some issues that we have, and that's in the program always. We have different opinions, but we also have issues that we have bigger ambitions than what we're capable of. The strength of ASPO is that it's actually one of the most innovative networks there is, as Shell pointed out, in the nowadays society. Everybody's talking about Web 3.0, Web 2.0, loose network organizations, young people, the hub, you meet people in a social. ASPO is the only organization indeed which is built solely on social capital. It doesn't need Web 2.0, the internet, well, a little bit, but we don't really have these channels. We have a conference and everybody learns from that, and you have your own interactions, and it's fairly loose in that setting, and it works quite well for the purposes of keeping each other informed within our field. For those, at least I feel a bit like a mastodon of ASPO, a little bit, I'm not that old, but for new people here, it's an idea to get a feel for many of the subjects. But we have struggle in the conversations that we have, but what should be done? And one of the reasons is that we want to do much more than we can within this loose network setting, and we have to realize that. ASPO is not fit as an organization to do things, really, beyond informing people, and I think it's great at that. If you look into the literature and into where what's been written. There's a lot of other people taking over the concept of PICO, taking it into the discourse, taking it into at least having an opinion about it. So it's playing a role, and I think ASPO can congratulate itself for that in many, many, many ways. Through countless talks that have been given, through many books that have been published, and that's still ongoing, through many media interviews on various subjects related to that, and that has given us the seeds to really go beyond for many things. The question is, I mean, how do we go forward? I think it will continue to work very well as a loose network, and we have to keep in mind that if we really want to take on the challenges, it's not ASPO that's going to do that, because it takes much more than just ASPO to change society and make all these micro improvements that need to be happening over time. But this is a personal reflection that I have on that. That was I think my talks. Thank you again to Michael and Georg. Thank you.